Hi, everyone. This is Karen Smiley. Welcome to 6Ps and AI Pods. This post is part of our AI 6P interview series on AI, software, and wetware. Our guests share their experiences with using AI and how they feel about AI using their data and content. I'm delighted to welcome Sumaiya Shrabony as my guest today on AI, software, and wetware. Sumaiya, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. Please tell us about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I'm Sumaya. The short version of my background is that I run enterprise data and AI adoption at a public research university in Colorado, United States. But honestly, the short version does not really get at it. Day to day, I manage about 200 Azure Data Factory pipelines, semantic models in SAS, tabular Power BI dashboards across 10 plus departments and reliable security for over 530 plus users in a FERPA governed environment. So it means who can see what student data, how that access is audited, how we prove it when the compliance team asks. That is the work. But what has happened since, I believe, January is a different story. I started building with AI, not testing it, not piloting it, building with it. I now run a 19 skill agentic system that researches and drafts my weekly content across 3 platforms. I built a 5 agent job search pipeline that scans listings, scores them, researches companies who sponsors H1B, tailors my resume, and finds real humans to contact, all before I wake up in the morning. I also have a conference agent that writes speaker pitches. I shipped 2 hackathon projects, one on data readiness for ML, one on multimodal AI for humanitarian work. So I think here's the thing that your listeners need to know about me is that I'm not someone who just tried ChatGPT a few times and has opinions. I'm someone who built her entire professional infrastructure on top of AI over roughly 1.5 years. And the more I built, the more complicated my feelings got about it. I'm an immigrant in the United States. I came from Bangladesh at 19 alone for a computer science degree. And I'm also the eldest daughter of my family. Both of those things turn out to matter a lot more for how I relate to AI than my technical skills. But I think we can get into that in the later questions.
Yes, thank you for sharing that background with us. That's really interesting that you've done all this with building these different skills. So yeah, let's talk more about that. Tell our
Mhm.
audience a little bit about your level of experience with AI and machine learning and analytics. You've described some of the work that you've done with different AI tools, but do you have formal education in it? Do you use it professionally and personally? It sounds like you do some of each.
Yes, I do it both professionally and personally. And for me, it sometimes feel like I'm more inside than is healthy. So professionally, I have spent roughly 7 years in enterprise data analytics, data architecture, data engineering, dimensional modeling, governance. The AI part came in layers. First, I joined our institutional AI working group at the university where we define the guiding principles for how we are going to roll out ChatGPT Edu across campus. Privacy, transparency, human first, explainability. We wrote their principles, then I had to actually implement that, which is where the gap between policy and practice gets painfully real. Personally, is where it gets interesting because when I was doing my undergrad and grad in computer science and information systems, I did pick up machine learning courses. Back in the day, it wasn't that much of AI application. It was more theory, algorithms, and such. But nowadays, when AI is so popular, there's multiple tools in practice. I decided I would just pick up some for my day-to-day use in my personal life. So since January, I have been building agentic AI systems. I decided I will not just use AI as a tool, but as a system that can be reused and be scheduled, even though I'm in the loop. So I have that content system. It has like 19 skills. It researches a topic, drafts contents, run voice compliance checks, produce visual briefs, cross-reference three different content calendars and handle platform-specific formatting for LinkedIn, Instagram, Substack. My job search system is now most crucial for me since I'm in the job search phase. So it has 5 agents: a scanner, a scorer, a company researcher, a resume tailor, and an outreach writer. They coordinate, they also deduplicate. They have their own daily schedule. So I just want your listeners to sit with it for a second that I automated my own job search. I automated my writing. So I automated the thing that is supposed to represent my voice and the thing that is supposed to represent my career. And I did that because it works. The system genuinely helps guide my chaotic thinking, overwhelming workload, and produces better output than I could do manually at the same volume. But this is the part I did not expect. The more I automate, the less I recognize myself in the output. And that's the tension I think I'm going to talk about a bit more in the later questions.
Yeah, that's a great observation that it is more productive, but then it maybe is less you than what you would have written originally for yourselves. Can you tell us a specific story on how you are using a tool that has AI or machine learning features? I'd like to hear your thoughts about how well those features work for you, basically what went well and maybe what didn't go so well.
I think I can give you a few. As I mentioned, AI shows up in my life at every level now, from the mundane to the deeply personal. And the experience is different at each one. So the everyday stuff first. I use Grammarly with AI features at almost everything I write professionally because English is not my first language. I try to make sure my grammar, the style checking, everything is genuinely useful with Grammarly's AI feature. It catches things I miss, especially when I'm writing fast. Then Grammarly added this generative AI suggestions. And that is where it got very weird for me. It started suggesting rewrites that were technically smooth, but sounded nothing like me. I would write a direct, slightly rough sentence, and Grammarly would offer a polished version that read like consulting memo. I started declining more and more those AI rewrites. I don't think I have even accepted them anymore in recent months. The tool was optimizing for a voice. It's really not mine. And I'm actively trying to avoid that, even though it feels so easy and fast to accept it. Then Zoom AI summaries. I sit in so many cross-departmental meetings at the university. So we have our Zoom enterprise plan, and it started generating meeting summaries automatically. And they're honestly about, I think, 70% useful. They capture the topics discussed, the action items, the decisions. What they miss is the subtext. They cannot capture that the provost's tone kind of shifted when we brought up the ChatGPT EDU budget. They cannot capture that 3 people went quiet when the data governance question came up. The summary says discussed data governance approach. And what actually happened was a 15-minute tension about who owns the AI policy. So the summary is correct, but it's missing everything that matters. So if we go by these summaries, our decisions in the future will just keep going in the wrong direction. And then the big one is my content system that I built for my content pipeline. I have 6 refinement passes in the system. One of them is called the skeptic, where it checks could anyone have written this? And if yes, then rewrite. Another is called the competitor, where it checks what angle would someone with 10x my followers already be posting. And it works. The system produces drafts that are structured, on brand, cite real sources, references my actual technical stack. But here is what really feels wrong. And even though I try to optimize the prompts, the reference files, the content pillars, it just, I think your listeners will recognize it even in a bigger or smaller scale. Around February, I kind of got fed up with my outputs. It was incredible, the essays. I will not say that it was bad. It just felt too incredible. It wasn't me at all in many cases because the structure was right, but I was just feeling like I'm missing my soul because it has no hesitation. It's way too confident in its writing. It just doesn't say to my readers what can go wrong, where I lack confidence. So now, when my agent runs on a Sunday, I have this ritual. I will sit with my draft and put the rough edges back in. I will add my hesitations. I will break the clean sentences. But isn't it weird to do this with your Sunday? I would never have done it if I didn't have an agent system. So, yeah, the tools are powerful enough to produce output that passes. Grammar check pass, meeting summaries pass, first drafts pass. But passes is actually not the same as is right. And the gap between passing and being right is where the human work actually lives now. So, your listeners who use any AI feature tool, even just Grammarly or Zoom, are navigating that gap every day, whether they have named it or not.
Yeah, and I think you're echoing things I've seen written on Substack where we both hang out and where we met about concerns that the systems go to the average and they are averaging out your voice, and yet voice is and should be distinctive. That distinctive voice is what your subscribers want. There's some risk of losing that if you let it sand away all the edges and smooth everything out and make it average.
Yeah, and sometimes if you keep seeing more outputs like this, you kind of even forget whether it is your voice or whether this is what it used to be.
It sounds like you are making good use of AI tools for a lot of different purposes. Are there any things that you avoid using AI tools for? Something that you would never use AI for? And if so, can you share an example of when and why you would choose not to use it?
Yes, so there are some ongoing rules that I set for myself, and a few were specific moments where I actively walked away from a tool that was right there, ready to go. And so I tried using generative AI for technical architecture diagrams early on. I needed visual showing of how our models connect to Power BI through the XMLA endpoint with row-level security filtering at the semantic layer. The AI generated diagram looked professional. Clean boxes, clean arrows, and the data flow was wrong. It had Power BI querying the SQL server directly instead of going through the semantic layer. And the more I tried to correct that visual, the more it started messing up. And I realized that if I had published that, someone on my team or someone reading my newsletter could have built something based on a structural lie. And a wrong architecture diagram is not a minor mistake. It is a confident misinterpretation of how a system actually works. So after that, I decided I'm never gonna spend or waste that much of my time in generative AI, at least for technical architecture diagrams. I now specifically use Excalibur and draw the diagrams with my hand. It's not hand like the Excalibur app, but it's just the way it is. I cannot go back, even though I know now ChatGPT is way better, but I just cannot. I cannot trust it to give me the better diagram that I can do manually. And on the ongoing rule for me is governance, especially in my professional work at CU Denver, where I work and I manage row-level security for the departments. It means who can see which student data when and under what conditions. I have been asked more than once whether we could use AI to help with access decisions, automate the review process, flag anomalies, and I use AI for the auditing side. Absolutely. Pattern detection, compliance checks, and this is what machines are good at. But the actual decision, should this person see the data? I will not automate that because it is not a classification problem. It is a values problem. It involves institutional trust. Why it is? Because historical relationships between departments, FARPA compliance, where the stakes are real, the kind of contextual judgment that a model trained on general patterns cannot make. The model does not know that the reason I restricted a specific report last year was a conversation between two directors that never made it into any system. That context lives on people. And I cannot expect my system to really know this answer because it was never in any of the system, right? It wasn't written down. So it's not the system's fault. It's just I'm never gonna trust it with the small nuances or the context that just
Mhm.
lives in people. There was
Mhm.
one more that I started doing that will be resonated by many people. I have been reading about it in a couple of my friends' posts too, that people have stopped using AI generated replies in emails. I have stopped it too, like in Gmail, Outlook, or whatever platforms. I will just turn off the suggested replies because I noticed that I was just clicking sounds good to be done with one of the replies since it's fast. But then I was putting replies that sounds good to the emails that just doesn't sound good. I was trying to avoid friction, but it's just making my tone go off. Or since I'm just outsourcing this, it's just making me kind of inactive from all the bigger decision makings, and that might really affect my career trajectories in the long run. So I think for your listeners, the question is not should I avoid AI? It's more like, do I notice when AI is making decisions I did not realize I was delegating? The suggested reply is a decision about your tone. The AI generated summary is a decision about what mattered in a meeting. The auto-generated architecture diagram is a decision about how your system works. If you're not checking those decisions, you're not using a tool. The tool is using your name.
Yeah, very important distinction. I'm glad you called that out. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a bit about what's behind these systems. One growing concern is where AI and ML systems get the data and the works that they train on. A lot of
Mhm.
times they're using data that people put into online systems or publish online. And the companies are not always transparent about how they intend to use our data when we sign up and agree to share it with them. I'm wondering how you feel about companies using people's data, people's works for
Mhm.
training their tools. One question that comes up is whether they should be required to get people's consent, to give them credit, or to compensate them, or all three. Some people have thoughts about that, about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, let's not talk about good thing or bad thing for us. Let me tell you my answer from two different positions because I think I hold both at the same time, and the tension between them is the honest answer. My number one position is from my day job, where I'm a data governance practitioner, right? So at work, when I'm managing access to student data under FERPA, department wants to see enrollment numbers. There is a process, there is documentation, there is a review. I can tell you who has access to what and why and when it was last audited. We do this because the data belongs to students, not to us. That principle is non-negotiable in my professional life. But in my second position, I'm a heavy AI user, right? I'm benefiting every single day from models that were trained on data their creators never consented to. So even though my content system runs on Cloud Code, my job search agent runs on Codex, the value I extract from those tools exists because someone's writing, someone's code, someone's published work became training data without anyone asking. I hold both of these positions simultaneously, and I think anyone who is honest about their relationship with AI does too. And I feel contradiction about both of my feelings. In one case, I'm holding governance in such a strict standard, but in another way, I am actually benefiting from the abuse of that. But I want to be specific about why each one matters, consent, credit, and compensation, because I think people collapse them into one thing, and they're actually three different problems. Consent is the foundation. If you read Monica's 3C framework, you know that this was originally for protecting indigenous culture property, and the principle transfers perfectly: free, prior, and informed consent, not buried in paragraph 47 of the terms of service, not opt in by default with a toggle you did not know existed. Actual consent, the kind where the person understands what they are agreeing to before they even agree. Then there's credit. It matters because invisible labor is exploitable labor. When a musician's work trains Suno or Udio, when a writer's essays train a language model, when a software's code trains Copilot, the output competes with the person whose work made it possible. But the person is invisible. No attribution, no acknowledgement, no record. Credit does not solve the economic problem, but it makes the relationship visible, and visibility is where accountability starts. And compensation is the hardest one because I think this is the one companies will resist the longest. Because compensation means the training data has a cost now. And right now, the entire economic model of foundational models depend on training data being free. If you had to compensate every writer, every artist, every developer whose work trained GPT-4 or Claude or Gemini, the cost structure changes fundamentally. I think it should change, but I also think I need to be honest that I benefit from the current arrangement every day. So, if you have ever written a blog post, published a photo, posted code on GitHub, left a review, you are a data contributor to those models, whether you know it or not. Even if I feel it's not good or it's bad, the supply chain is there, and I'm also the problem inside the supply chain.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are wrestling with that duality, and I
Mhm.
appreciate you being so candid about seeing it from both sides. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
As someone who uses tools, you mentioned looking at terms and conditions and page 47 and not being aware of it. Do you feel like any of the providers of the tools that you use have been transparent with you about where they got the data that they use for training their models and whether there was consent from the people whose data it is?
No, and I think it has been an escalating pattern since 2024, and 2026 kind of made it worse. The most recent example that genuinely shocked me is GitHub because I use this extensively. In March 2026, they announced that starting April 24, interaction data from Copilot free Pro and Pro Plus users, your inputs, your outputs, your code snippets, all of it would be used to train AI models unless you opt out. Opt out, not opt in. Default is opt in. Your code that trains their model is opt in by default. The community discussion on GitHub got so many downvotes and responses, but only one GitHub VP defended the plan. Developers were furious, and this is GitHub, a platform where people publish open source code. Even that community, which understands licensing better than almost any user base, felt blindsided by the default. Then there's Atlassian, which just announced that starting August, they will use customer data from Jira, Confluence, and other cloud products to train Rovo and RoboDev. 300,000 customers were affected. And here is the part that should alarm anyone who uses enterprise SaaS. If you're on free, standard, or premium tiers, metadata collection is mandatory. You cannot opt out. Only enterprise customers get opt-out controls. So Atlassian created a system where opting out of AI training is a premium feature you have to pay for. And this reverses their prior stated position that customer data would not be used for AI training. They said one thing, they're doing the opposite. That is not a transparency gap. That is a broken promise with a price tag. And I think X is the most extreme case right now. Their January terms revision explicitly treats AI prompts, outputs, and interaction as content under a worldwide royalty-free sublicensable license for any purpose, including training. And the opt-out tool provides incomplete protection because your data remains available to X for other purposes under the 2026 terms. That is not an opt-out. That is complete theater.
Yeah. So, Sumaiya, when you've worked with building AI-based tools or systems, can you share about where the data came from and how it was obtained?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I have built AI systems, my content system, the job search pipeline, and hackathon projects. And here I can tell you about where the data came from because I put it there and I know where it came from, right? My content system does not fine tune a model. It uses Claude as a runtime and feeds it in my context at interference time. The training data for my system is my own voice rules, my own content pillars, my own brand guidelines, my own editorial standards, files I wrote. My hackathon project, Data Ready, works with email datasets to assess data readiness. The datasets it evaluates are user provided and is never stored in any cloud platforms. It also uses public benchmark sets to give you the demo scores. I think this distinction matters because there is a difference between building a system that uses an existing model's capabilities with your own data at interference time and building a system that scrapes other people's work to train a new model. I do the first, but the companies whose models I build on did the second. So I'm benefiting from both, which is why I do not think anyone gets to be purely self-righteous about this. As I mentioned, the supply chain is compromised, and I'm actively in the supply chain.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And you've probably seen these articles as well. If you look farther back in the supply chain to how the data has been processed and where we get the devices that we use and where the minerals come from to build them, that entire supply chain going far back beyond what most people even see or think about, it's
Mhm.
all compromised too. And there's a great article by Rebecca and Baya that I just read talking about how being ethical may mean accepting that we have a responsibility for this, that there's no way to make a perfectly ethical, innocent choice. In some
Mhm.
cases, there's just no good options. We don't have better options. And I think a lot of us are trying to fight so that we have better options, that we have more ethical tools, but that's not where we are right now.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Even if I use local AI models, there's still no 100% better way to make it fully ethical. That's
mm,
what I found out.
yeah, but we can still try.
Yeah,
We can,
obviously, we have
yeah,
to try.
yes, there are things that we can do and we can take steps. I'm always glad
Mhm.
to hear when people are making efforts.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your data for a minute. Just being consumers, being members of the public, our personal data and our content has probably been used by some AI-based tools or systems. Do you know of any cases that you could share when your data has been used?
Yes, I can probably share three at different scales because I think the range is what makes this real for the listeners. The personal one is I have been active on LinkedIn for I think almost 10 years now. I post 3 to 4 times a week, technical analysis, career reflection, enterprise frameworks. LinkedIn has been using member content to train their AI models since I believe 2024, opted in by default, opt out only by prospective. But here's what happened more recently. In March 2026, I mentioned it before too, GitHub announced the same thing for Copilot users. Your code snippets, your inputs, your outputs, training their models starting April, unless you opt out. I use Copilot. I write code. I did not consent. I found out from a news article, went into settings and toggled the opt out. But here's the question I cannot answer. Was my code already used before I toggled? GitHub says previously opted out, preferences are retained. But what about the period between they started collecting and when I found out? That gap is where trust completely dies. And then Atlassian, right? It's heavily used in my work. We use Jira and Confluence at work. We manage sprints, document architecture decisions, we track incidents. They announced that starting August, they will use the data to train Rovo. And if we are not on enterprise tier, metadata collection is mandatory. We cannot opt out, even if we want to, without paying extra. And Spring velocity data, our issue descriptions, our workflow names, all of it feeds their AI, whether we agree to it or not. This is enterprise data. Some of it is for adjacent in my environment. The idea that a SaaS vendor can unilaterally decide to train AI models on my institutional workflow data, and then the opt out is a paid premium feature should concern anyone who manages data in a regulated environment. The one that sits with me most, honestly, is watching my own content come back to me in someone else's mouth. As I write weekly newsletter, enterprise AI adoption from practitioner said, I put hours into each one, even though I'm using a content system. All of my contents are my own experiences, whatever I'm finding, my technical references. I sit with the drafts for hours to make it, but then I will see AI generated LinkedIn post on the same topics, sometimes within days or hours, using the same framing, same structural argument, sometimes even the same example sequence. I cannot prove those posts were trained on my writing specifically, right? But I publish publicly. My work is indexed, and language models do not spontaneously arrive at the same. Here is how row-level security governance fills in multi-department Power BI deployment framing that I wrote last month, right? So the economics of it are what bothers me. I am not a full-time paid writer. So this is not a direct income loss for me, but I watch the effort to reach call-ups in real time. Someone can prompt a model with write a LinkedIn post about enterprise BI governance challenges, get a version that is structurally similar to what I spent 4 hours writing, post it in 90 seconds. Get comparable engagement because the algorithm does not distinguish between a 4 hour effort and a 4 minute effort. The content I make is being used at some level to train the models that produce the content that competes with mine. And there is no mechanism for me to know to consent or to be compensated. It's not hypothetical, it's just a normal Tuesday now. So I want to name something about the opt-out conversation that I think gets missed. When people say just opt out, they assume that opting out is free. It's not. In my scenario, as I'm on an immigrant visa, every time I push back on a system, I'm aware that I'm making a choice that carries a different weight than it does for a citizen. Opting out of LinkedIn AI training means accepting that my content gets less distribution, which means fewer recruiter views, which matters when my visa status completely depend on employment. Challenging a vendor's data policy at work means being the person who slows down adoption, which is a different risk when you are not a permanent employee category because of your visa status. So the costing of opting out is not evenly distributed, and the people with the least institutional power pay the highest price of saying no.
Yeah, about having a higher risk as a non-citizen. One example that a lot of people bring up is going through TSA when they travel. And there's a note on the TSA signs at the bottom in small print saying that you are entitled to opt out of allowing them to take a picture of your face and use facial recognition on it. But even for citizens, that can be an intimidating thing to stand up and request that. I understand it would be even more so for anyone who is not in the same legal status and might feel less safe to do so. As you said, it's not always free. It's not always even a choice.
Yeah.
So that's an important consideration, I think. You've mentioned Atlassian and LinkedIn, and it sounds like Atlassian at least was proactive, telling people about it before they did it. But if you're on an enterprise system, or if you're not on an enterprise system but you're using one of their pro licenses, it's not like you can just change over your whole company's operation to an enterprise plan within a short period of time. Then I remember that in 2024 that they were not proactive about telling us. They basically opted us in for everything up to that point. And only the people in Europe got a choice about whether or not their content was used. So they definitely didn't make us aware proactively. Do you know of any other companies that have made you aware that they would use your information for training an AI system?
That GitHub post that went viral, they mentioned upfront that their policy is changing. It also discloses that individual users' writing is used for product environment. That toggle exists, but it's enabled by default. So the majority of users are contributing to their writing model improvement without ever knowing the setting exists. Even for me, I actually didn't know that Grammarly's toggle is opt-in by default. I had to go into their settings to check out. I think after months of usage, when I remembered, oh, let me check whether it's actually opt-in by default or not. So this is what is surprising for me. Why it has to be by default opt-in? Why cannot it have opt-out by default, then give us an option, okay, please click to opt-in?
Yeah, I think the short answer comes down to, in some ways, it's their business model.
Mhm.
They're counting on the fact that most people won't think to go in and look for things. As soon as I create a new account somewhere, I immediately go find the privacy settings, but
Yeah.
we shouldn't have to do that.
Exactly. Like, why should it be so hidden, especially for users who are not that technical, right? People who doesn't have that awareness that this kind of things can be completely plugged in. They might not even realize that there are this kind of options or the data is being used in this way. For example, my family back home, they don't realize that if you use social media or LinkedIn, the data is completely by default training their AI model unless they go inside and opt out, especially if you're not a primary English user, but you're heavily using apps that are English based. So,
It's one thing to read the terms and conditions when we sign up, but they also have been known to change them after the fact. Sometimes as a surprise, as you've mentioned, and sometimes they tell us in advance.
I want to be really specific because I think there is a legal shift happening right now that the listeners should know about. California's AB 2013 took effect January 2026. It is the first US law that requires AI developers to publicly disclose what data they use to train their models, whether copyrighted materials were included, and whether personal information was part of the training set. That is new. And on August 2026, the EU AI Act's enforcement provisions for high-risk systems and general-purpose AI models become enforceable, with fines up to 15 million euros or 3% of global revenue. That includes mandatory training data disclosures tied to the EU copyright directive opt-out. So the regulatory landscape is shifting, but right now, for a US-based user like me or you, the answer to do I have a real choice is it depends on my geography, my subscription tier, and how carefully I read the settings page. GDPR gives European users actual rights. California's AB 2013 gives transparency, but not opt out enforcement. And for Atlassian users on standard or premium, there is no opt out at all for metadata collection. A real choice requires three things: awareness that the choice exists, understanding of what each option means, and confidence that your choice will be respected. Most platforms give you the first if you're technically curious, the second if you read the fine print, the third, you're trusting the same company that changed its terms without your input to honor the toggle it gave you. I think your listeners should decide for themselves whether that is a real choice or just a gesture.
Yeah, that's a great point. About 2 years ago, Meta announced that they were going to start using all of our pictures and early
Mm.
information. And some of us weren't even able to opt out. They had this opt out mechanism, but I put in mine and they said, no, we don't have to honor that. So we're not going to. It's like, okay, then
Mm.
I'm going to delete everything. And I did. I just deleted years of pictures and text and everything. But afterwards, I was thinking, I have almost no confidence that they aren't going to use it anyway. It's on
Yeah.
backups. They already had it. I wouldn't want to count on it not being used. Some of my guests have said they like what they call a billboard rule now, where if they
Mm.
want to see it on a billboard along the highway, they don't want to share it in any of those systems because they don't trust the
Mm.
companies to
Yeah.
not use it if they say they won't.
Yeah, when cloud was booming, there was this saying going around, if anything is cloud once, it's there forever. So, what does that even mean?
Yeah. So has the company's use of your personal data and content ever created any specific issues for you, like privacy violations or phishing attacks or any loss of income? Any examples like that?
Yes, and the one that made me the most angry has nothing to do with AI companies directly. It's about how data flows when it leaves your hands, regardless of what you consented to. In mid 2024, I ran a credit inquiry to explore buying a house. Standard process, I opted out of third-party data sharing completely. I checked the boxes, did what you were supposed to do. However, within days, my phone became unusable. Robocalls, marketing calls, scam calls, all related to mortgage lending offers. Not one or two, a constant stream that has not stopped to this day. 2 years later, I still get them. It's frustrating. What happened is something called triggerlets. When a lender pulls your credit, the credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion can legally sell that inquiry to other lenders and marketers, not your credit reports, just the fact that you applied. But that fact alone is enough to generate a lead, and that lead gets sold and resold. The CFPB received 5 million complaints about credit reporting agencies and lenders in 2025 alone, a 3,700% increase from 2019. The problem got so bad that Congress passed the Home Buyers Privacy Protection Act, signed in September last year, which bans trigger leads starting March 2026, except in narrow circumstances. Congress literally had to write a law because opting out did not work. And here's the part that connects to everything else we have been talking about. I opted out. I followed the process, but it did not matter. The system was designed so that my credit inquiry was a product before I finished the application. That is the same structural problem as AI training data consent. You can check every opt-out box on LinkedIn or GitHub or Atlassian, but the data that has already moved has already moved. The architecture is built to extract first and process objections later. My phone ringing at 9 p.m. with a fake lending pro offer is the most mundane, most annoying, most daily version of the same consent failure that Karen, you have been documenting in the AI training data context. It is just less interesting to write about because it is not a frontier model. It's a spreadsheet of phone numbers sold for 3 cents each, probably. And on the professional side, the issue compounds because I need to govern data access in a FERPA regulated environment. So when companies like Atlassian just announce abruptly that they would use product interaction data to train their models, and metadata collection would be mandatory, I had to stop my actual work and draft a risk assessment. Our Jira and Confluence instances contain sprint planning, incident descriptions, architectural docs, discussion threads referencing student-facing systems. This is not abstract. If that trains a model and something surfaces that traces to a student record, I'm the person explaining it to the compliance office. That is the dual cost. Personally, my phone is a liability because I ran a credit check 2 years ago. Professionally, I'm now spending real hours on vendor data policy review that did not exist in my job description. And in both cases, I did the right thing. I opted out. I read the terms. It just did not matter. So for your listeners, if you have ever opted out of something and then watched the thing you opted out of happen anyway, that's not a bug. That's just the business model. And it's the same business model whether the product is a mortgage lead or an AI training data set.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is worth noting is that this use of our data, it's not really new with the generative AI tools. It just really hit broad usage a few years ago. They've been doing that really for decades, but what makes it more insidious is that once our data is out there and it's been sold, once it gets pulled into an AI system as training data, it's never going to come back out. So whatever mistakes or connections between a phone number and some other data about you, there's just no way it's ever going to get corrected. And that was already an existing problem, but it just amplifies it and makes it more serious.
Yeah, I mean, previously we could still trace it back to where the data leaked, but now we cannot even know when and where the data leak or data sharing happened.
Yeah. So last question. We've talked a little bit about trust. We see public distrust of AI and tech companies has been growing, and for some good reasons, I think. I'm wondering what you think is the most important thing that these companies would need to do to earn and to keep your trust, if that's even possible. Some folks I've talked to say they don't feel they could ever really trust them. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's really gonna be very hard to trust again, like 100%. But at least I think the one thing I would really like to see is default to off, you know. And I know I have been talking about it in previous questions too, but I think this is the single most important thing for me. I know it sounds simple, but I mean it to sound simple. The complexity is a distraction. Every AI company that wants my trust should adopt one principle. No user's data or content is used for training unless the user explicitly, affirmatively opts in, not opt out, opt in, not buried in settings on the sign up screen. before the account is created. And the reason I'm picking this one over transparency, over compensation, over ethic boards is because it is the one that cannot be performed. You can write a beautiful AI ethics statement and ignore it operationally. I've seen organizations do that. You can publish a model card and leave out the uncomfortable parts. You can create an ethics board and then override its recommendations. But default to off is binary. Either the toggle starts at off or it just doesn't. Either the user opted in before the data was used or they did not. There is no way to fake it. And specific implementation ideas, I think I can give a few. First, data provenance labeling. California's AB 2013 that took effect now requires AI developers to use and disclose what data trained their models, including whether copyrighted materials or personal information was included. That's a start, but it is just one state and it is disclosure without enforcement teeth. And the EU Act enforcement provisions will require training data transparency for general purpose AI models with actual fines behind it, up to 15 million euros or 3% of global revenue. We need the California standard as a federal baseline with the EU's enforcement model behind it. Disclosure without consequences is just a press release. Secondly, I think retroactive consent mechanism is very important. Every platform I have discussed today, LinkedIn, GitHub, Atlassian, X, says the opt-out only applies going forward. Everything already ingested is already used. That cannot be the final answer. If you can ingest my data without asking, you can build the infrastructure to remove it when I ask. Atlassian says they will retain models within 90 days of an opt-out and remove in-app data within 30 days of deletion. That is actually a good model. Other companies should match it. Most will never do. And lastly, stop gating opt-out behind premium tiers, please. This is really crucial. Why should I need to pay more and more just to be able to have the opt-out option? If it becomes the industry norm, privacy will become a luxury feature. The people with the least institutional power, the freelancers, the small teams, the individual developers will get the least protection. That is the opposite of how it should work. So the foundation is needed to be default off. Everything else is kind of negotiable for me if I can just get this foundation there.
That makes good sense. Yeah, you have to start from the point where if you have the default off, then hopefully they would be transparent about any opting in that would be happening and telling you what you're opting into and things like that. But yeah, you have to have a starting point. I want to thank you, Sumaiya, for sharing your time with me for this interview. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
I just want to talk to the person listening right now who is exhausted, not exhausted from work, exhausted from the feeling that AI means you should be doing more, that everyone else figured out everything about it and you are so behind. If you're not automating something, you are failing. This is completely wrong. I want to tell you something about why I built all these systems because the reason is not what you might think. I'm an eldest daughter in a Bangladeshi family. I came to the US. The wiring I grew up with is anticipate everything, carry the load, never drop the ball, never be the reason something fails. If you grew up in this way, you know it's not a personality trait, it's an operating system. It runs in the background of every decision. Now give that person AI. It hands me infinite capacity to do exactly what I was already wired to do. Before AI, I could carry a lot. Now I can carry almost everything. I can automate my newsletter, my job search, my content calendar. I can do all of it, so I do all of it. And the result is that I produce more than I ever have. So I'm more anxious than I have ever been because the finish line just moved. When I could do just X, doing X was enough. But now I know that I can do 5 times. So if I ever do 4 times, it just feels like I'm falling behind. In April, I caught myself at 1 a.m. building a new agent to automate something I could have done in 20 minutes by hand. That's the moment I stopped because it was a bad idea. I realized I was not building it to save time. I was building it because finishing felt like permission to rest. I was not going to give myself permission anyway. So I closed the laptop. That was the first time in months. And the moment I realized it's becoming unhealthy. So now I have two rules on myself. No building after 10 p.m. And one day a week, I will not open any agentic systems. Obviously, I break those rules sometimes, but at least the rule exists, right? So it's different from before. I think your listeners feel the version of it applies to them too. Maybe they're not eldest daughters or immigrants, but if you have ever looked at all the things AI could help you do and felt not excited but overwhelmed, that's the same worrying under a different name. We're scaling capacity with our scaling piece, and I worry we are about to do that to millions of people and call it productivity. So if you're listening and you feel like you cannot keep up, you're not behind. The finish line just moved. It was not your fault, and the bravest thing you can do with a tool that offers infinite capacity is choose not to use all of it. And I obviously do not have it figured out. I still check my agents before breakfast, but I'm learning that the point of building a system is that you can do everything to not choose to let it do everything. Thank you so much, Karen, for giving me the space to say that out loud.
Thank you. And do you want to let people know where they can find you online if they're interested in reading more of your writing?
Yes, absolutely. I'm almost 24/7 available on LinkedIn. I have a weekly newsletter in Substack. You can feel free to subscribe to it if you want to learn more about enterprise AI adoption from a practitioner's seat. I'm also making educational content in Instagram almost daily. You can find me there as well.
We'll have the LinkedIn link in the article, but I know some people listen instead of reading.
LinkedIn, I don't even know if they type my name, it even comes. When they type Sumaiya Shrabony, it goes to another person in LinkedIn somehow. That's the only problem.
Some names
Exactly.
are more
It goes to
common.
another
Yeah.
person by default because they have more followers.
So maybe the best way for someone to find you is to find you on Substack and connect there. Say the name of your newsletter.
My newsletter name is Ground Truth.
All right. Well, we will include the links in the article, so if anyone doesn't get it from the recording, they'll be able to pick it up from there. I really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you so much for making time for the interview.
Thank you for giving me such a long time, Karen.
About this interview series and newsletter. This post is part of our AI 6P interview series on AI, software, and wetware. It showcases how real people around the world are using their wetware, brains and human intelligence, with AI-based software tools, or are being affected by AI. And we're all being affected by AI nowadays in our daily lives, perhaps more than we realize. For some examples, see post, but I don't use AI. We want to hear from a diverse pool of people worldwide in a variety of roles. If you're interested in being a featured interview guest, anonymous or with credit, please get in touch. 6Ps and AI Pods, AI 6P is a 100% reader-supported publication. All new posts are free to read and listen to. To automatically receive new AI 6P posts and support our work, consider becoming a subscriber. It's free.